Donald Trump may well be the most unlikely president of the United States in modern times, even more than the young African-American senator who preceded him in the job. Trump has defied the conventional wisdom and continues to do so as president. He has a strong core of loyal supporters, yet his overall approval ratings are low, and he is under attack from many sides. But what does he stand for? How are his problems influencing his decisions? And what should China and the rest of the world be most concerned about in dealing with this unusual American leader? To discuss these issues and more, I'm very happy to be joined in the studio by Professor Wang Yun of the School of International Studies at Peking University and Teng Jianqun, Director of the Center for Arms Control at the China Institute of International Studies. We shall also speak via Skype to Richard White, Senior Fellow and Director of the Center for Political Military Analysis at the Hudson Institute. That's our topic. This is a dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. But before we get started, let's quickly hear what President Trump himself says.
My fellow Americans, a short time ago, I ordered the United States Armed Forces to launch precision strikes on targets associated with the chemical weapons capabilities of Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad. I am asking Congress to address the fundamental flaws in the terrible Iran nuclear deal. I'm looking at two-state and one-state, and I like the one that both parties like. I think Brexit's going to be a wonderful thing for your country. You're going to be able to make free trade deals without having somebody watching you and what you're doing. North Korea is a situation that should have been handled 25 years ago, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, and 5 years ago, and it could have been handled much more easily. We had various administrations, many administrations, which left me a mess. But I'll fix the mess. I view them as a friend. I have tremendous respect for President Xi. We have a great relationship. They're helping us a lot in North Korea, and that's China. I don't blame China. The era of economic surrender is totally over. From now on, we expect trading relationships to be fair and, very importantly, reciprocal. We're going to have trade, but we're going to have one-on-one, not one of these deals where you can't get out of them and it's a disaster. So we're going to have plenty of trade, but TPP wasn't the right way. Today I'm taking bold action to follow through on that promise. My administration is putting an end to the war on coal. I am taking historic steps to lift the restrictions on American energy, to reverse government intrusion, and to cancel job-killing regulations.
Welcome to the discussion here, gentlemen. All politics are local, so let's begin our discussion from domestic politics of President Trump. What do you think of the domestic problems and challenges for the presidency of Donald Trump?
Okay. Yeah, I think the domestic politics is so important at this moment. And Donald Trump, President Trump, now they face a big challenge in domestic politics. They worry about the result of the midterm elections. They worry about the GOP or Republican parties lost the majority seat at both chambers of the Congress. But if he can't take the majority the seat, so in the Congress, I think he might have a lot of problems in the next few years.
It might be a big luxury to talk about the midterm elections, since he's likely to be impeached before the midterm elections occur. Many of his close associates, including his personal lawyer, are put under investigation, to say nothing of his alleged contact with the Russians. Now, these problems, each of them could be lethal for his political career, and he could go down history as someone the worst in people's living memory, right?
Yeah, he denied all the execution from the public and from the opposition parties and leaders and the congressmen or the judges. And this is actually a very important part for his domestic policy. making. For example, he reduced the tariff in last year and also gave the so-called opportunity for the green, blue, the workers in the country. And this is actually just a response to the situation in the United States, because the political struggles, among different interest groups, and also gave the public the feeling that the president, while lacking of public service experience and also the experience in the government, how can he give a clear-cut explanation on his policy, on his administration? And at this moment, I think the domestic, especially the investigation on the connection between him and Russia, this is a very important occasion for him. I'm not sure he can, pass through this important time, and this will give him some, impact on his coming administrative affairs and also policy making.
Thank you so much. Let me go to Richard White. Hello, Richard.
Hello.
Can you brief us about the latest concerning investigation of his personal lawyer? Do you think Bill Clinton has survived Lewinsky, but do you think President Trump is able to survive Stormy Daniels?
I mean, so far, there have been a series of accusations, and some of his associates have been implicated in what could be possible crimes. And there's clear evidence that Russia tried to interfere in the U.S. elections. But there's not yet evidence that Trump himself encouraged what Russia did, or worked with colluded with the Russians, as he says, or has been involved in any other crime while president or when running for president. So far, there's not the smoking gun that would force him from office through impeachment or related mechanisms.
I'm not asking questions about Russia. What about the Stormy Daniels? Can Stormy Daniels be compared to Lewinsky?
Well, except that there's been already a number of connections between him and women and alleged affairs and so on. But so far this has not hurt him that much at the electorate. I mean, there are some people who voted against him because of this, but it's not something that's so overwhelming that will cause him to be forced from office or perhaps even in re-election. For whatever reason, his electors come to grips with this issue and decided that he has other advantages that outweigh whatever personal foibles people might see in him.
Thank you so much, Richard. Yong, can any of the issues kill President Trump, or will lead to the impeachment? Contact with Russia, Stormy Daniels, and the alleged obstruction of the justice.
Yes, I think all these factors can lead to impeachment. Okay, that put the Donald Trump in a very difficult position. Right? So I think now, we worry about the truth. I think the independent investigation is important. Personally, I believe it might become to the truth. I think that is why I think Donald Trump and his team, right? So has caused a series of crises, right? Especially in international affairs.
President Trump looks pretty provocative on the external front in terms of foreign policy, such as the proposed relocation of U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, causing yet another intifada in the making. He used phrases like fire and fury to organize massive military maneuvers on the doorsteps of China in Northeast Asia, imposing maximum pressure on the DPRK. And he went as far as to launch trade war on the issue of high technology, saying the United States would have a zero tolerance for China's digital leadership, and it's a matter of to be or not to be between the two biggest economies. So do you think he deliberately organized these things to divert attention from the domestic politics?
Maybe some experts said this is actually a transition of the domestic pressure from the other countries to the other countries, and I think Donald Trump actually is facing very serious challenges at home.
You mean he's going to be a president of foreign policy instead of a president of domestic politics?
Yeah, sure. I think this time Donald Trump would like to manipulate the regional issues in Northeast Asia and also in Middle East to lift the pressure at home. And actually, I think in 1 year at least, Donald Trump in the office of White House, and he did not give a clear-cut explanation of his foreign policy. We call it is a piece-by-piece policy and responsive policy to North Korea. Several months ago, he used a very tough word against Kim Jong-un, but now he would like to have a meeting with Kim Jong-un. And in the Middle East, he mentioned the move of the
excuse me, we'll go back to foreign policy issues, but Yong, what do you think of the domestic agenda for President Trump? Let's look at economic performance since he took office 1 year ago.
Right. I think that it's interesting to evaluate the performance of Donald Trump's policy. Right. I think from the economic perspective, I think the Trump might have done a good job. Right, we have the high growth rate and a very low employment rate. Right, so the growing confidence of investors now, from the stock exchange markets. Right, so I think that is one of the measures from the Trump is the tax reform program. Right, it's lowering the tax rate. Give a big boost of the confidence of investment, in the United States, and in other countries. Right. So I think that might be the positive to the result of the midterm elections. Okay. So I think, but further on this, we know that the students of international relations know how the deep, the link between the domestic politics and foreign policy. So I would like to aid, the one thing. Okay, the Donald Trump and make this tough on the foreign policy, on China, bombing Syria. Okay, will be tough on Iran. Right, all these things are connected. Right, they try to turn the domestic attention. Okay.
Democrats are not stupid. Do you think they will take back the majority in the midterm elections? What do you think of the future of the congressional elections?
Yes, I think that is a good question. So I think a lot of people think in this way. So I think there is a Democratic Party have quite a high possibility to take back at least one chamber of the Congress. So if they take two, I think the Trump will have a very difficult times in the next 2 years. Right? I cannot mention the re-elections. Right? So I think the Democratic Party will take advantage of the majority in the Congress to pursue very hard on all these cases under investigations, right? Okay, to bring so-called the truth. Okay, like the Russia's meddling in the U.S. elections, right? So there might be some of the scandals involved Donald Trump in Moscow, and all these things, right? Why can they work together? Well, I think if in that case, might bring down Donald Trump.
Now, what about multilateral commitments? The United States has pulled out of Paris climate change, TPP. NAFTA is being renegotiated with Canada and Mexico. He threatens to alienate almost all the allies, to say nothing of China, which has been taken as the #1 strategic competitor. So what will be happening in the immediate future?
I think he will adopt protectionism-oriented policy toward all the countries in the world, including his allies, including Japan and France and Germany. And of course, China has become a so-called strategic competitor at this moment. And maybe he's right. China's fast development did give some worries to the politicians in the United States. But I think this is a globalization of world economy and the multipolarization of international wars, politics. So this is a very specific occasion for the countries concerned. So the United States, actually, President Donald Trump has adopted a very traditional approach to develop his country, including traditional politics at home. I don't think such a policy will give any significant benefit to that country. We should, have a new mind, new vision toward each other, and we should cooperate in the future, not only protectionism.
Well, President Trump says you should buy American, hire Americans, putting America absolutely ahead of any other countries or the rest of the world. He supports Brexit. Richard, he supports Brexit. And Angela Merkel says the European Union must take the destiny of this regional bloc into its own hands. What do you make of the multilateral relationship between Trump and particularly the U.S. allies?
Right. President Trump has to sort of backed off from some of the criticism he had of the EU and other multilateral organizations such as NATO. And his administration is presently supporting the EU, working with the EU to strengthen the Western presence in Europe. More broadly, his administration, if you read the new national security strategy, national defense strategy, and so on, has stressed the importance of U.S. alliances. So in actual practice, the administration's policies are very similar to those of previous administrations. And so I think that's what we should look to rather than some of the statements that Trump made during the campaign and early in office.
What are your thoughts, Richard, about the upcoming visit by your Secretary of Treasury? Will there be a thaw in the strained trade relations between the two biggest economies?
I don't know. I mean, it's hard for us as observers, and I'm sure to you from Beijing, to determine when the people in our governments are making statements to gain negotiating leverage, hinting at threats, as opposed to whether they'll execute these strategies. So I think some of what we've seen have been an effort to try and prepare for the talks by the Secretary. I still hopeful we'll come to some agreement. I mean, we certainly have a lot to cooperate for, especially on Korea and related issues. So I'm pretty optimistic. I still think we've seen a lot of posturing, but when people actually sit down and negotiate, they'll come up with some agreement we're going to both be satisfied with.
What will happen to the process of denuclearization since President Trump agrees to meet with Mr. Kim Jong-un from the DPRK?
This is a very important step taken by the two sides. For decades, the two sides denied to have such a face-to-face meeting. But this time, Kim Jong-un actually has changed his domestic policy. That means DPRK would like to move from the nuclear bomb to the economic development of that country. And this is a very important policy change in DPRK and gave Kim Jong-un a great driving forces to go ahead with such good attitude toward the outside world, especially with the United States. And if we look at the election in 2016, President Donald Trump at that time even said that the DPRK nucleus is easy. He can find a solution by Hamburg, by phone call, and so Donald Trump would like to make a history by the meeting with DPRK leader, and that's why the two leaders agreed to have such a meeting in late May or early June. And this is a very important step, at least for the peace and stability in Northeast Asia. That might be a good signal to all the countries concerned to sit down, to return to the negotiation table, to find a peaceful solution, not to use the so-called invincible fleet of the United States and to use the rocket against the United States. So we have some very important occasion to maintain such a momentum to go ahead.
Yong, how do you assess the outcome coming out of the upcoming summit between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un? Do you think the maximum pressure that's imposed by the U.S. government will lead to opening up very dramatic domestic changes in the DPRK? Because there have been assumptions and rumors that the DPRK is likely to copy China's experiences since this year witnesses the 40th anniversary of China's reform and opening up. China sincerely invites Mr. Kim Jong-un to come over and take a look like what his father did.
Yeah. I think that a very interesting moment to look at the changes of the Korean Peninsula as partially the result of the North Korea Kim Jong-un Donald Trump meeting, right? So I think that is I think we can give we have we can have the reasons to be cautiously optimistic about the outcome of the meetings, but there is still much uncertainties, right? Where the reasons that if that Donald Trump is satisfied with what the policies that Kim Jong-un and has announced, like the suspension of the nuclear test, right? I think that followed by the opening up and reform policy. I think that can be the good to the region, to China, and also to the U.S. But we have talked about the role of U.S. domestic politics, right? So I think on the issues of North Korea, there's no uniform positions in the United States, and from the recent histories we have seen, right? That is partisan politics. Will be involved in that, right? So if the president proceeded this policy, they might have the strong oppositions, from the other party. So I think that is why let me to be cautiously, so about cautiously optimistic about the future. We should have reservations about the outcome.
Richard, in the very beginning of his presidency, Donald Trump even threatened to trade the one China principle for China's help with the DPRK issue of denuclearization. Next, a couple of months from now, the American Institute will be inaugurated in Taiwan, and a very senior government official will be sent to attend the opening ceremony. According to the Taiwan Travel Act, government officials at all levels from the U.S. are likely to travel to Taiwan. Do you think this is likely to be a very serious catalyst for a major crisis across the Taiwan Strait?
You are correct in that the new legislation could allow for much deeper U.S.-Taiwanese ties, and that I would expect the Chinese government to react very negatively should that occur. But it doesn't necessarily need to happen. In other words, the legislation, the acts, and so on, they would allow it, but they could be just some people at the sort of lower level bureaucrats. I mean, for example, the person who came from the Defense Department and the State Department so far have been not much higher than the past. I mean, I think that if a secretary, a cabinet secretary, Treasury or State or Defense would go, it would cause a lot of problems. But I don't think that so far that they plan to do that. It's sort of basically the administration is trying to respond to congressional pressure to move closer to Taiwan. Trump personally feels close to Taiwan, but they understand that that would really cause major problems in the China relationship, and at the time I think they still have higher priorities, Korea, trade, and so on. So I think we can avert this crisis through prudent planning in both capitals.
I've interviewed many Americans these few months. All of them expressed a cautious optimism about the future of the Taiwan Strait. And yet we have John Bolton, right? He's a super hawk. He encourages Taiwan to be independent and even wants Taiwan to be a member of the United Nations. So what if this guy were to visit Taiwan on the occasion of the American Institute, which would be launched into operation 2 months from now? What would be the worst case scenario?
Yeah, I'm very worried about the situation in the Taiwan Strait, right? So now we have, you see, Donald Trump's Taiwan policy is driven by two important forces, right? So one is, those, or however we can call it, the treat hawks. Call for the tough positions on China, right? They want to. They might have some transaction approach.
What would be the worst case scenario?
Worst case scenario, the confrontation.
Major military confrontation is likely to occur.
Yes, I think so.
Tianjin?
Yeah, I think this is actually a very tricky situation at this moment. The United States, especially under the leadership of President Donald Trump, he would like to manipulate Taiwan issue to challenge the core interest of China. And I think we still remember that, on 4th December 2016, Donald Trump got the phone call from Madam Tsai, the regional leader of Taiwan. And he even said, for decades, Taiwan spent a lot of money to buy U.S.-made military system. And why, I could not get a phone call from Madam Tsai. And after the Mar-a-Lago summit between President Xi and President Donald Trump, I think last April, I think President Donald Trump suddenly realized the important to recognize the one China policy. And so the situation across Taiwan Strait entered a very unstable time because the regional leaders in Taiwan would like to ask the United States to give more and more support, especially at home and abroad. And this time I think China show its strong determination and also the capability, including the military drills carried out recently in Taiwan.
Exactly.
Strait.
They have the Taiwan Travel Act or Taiwan Relations Act, but we have the anti-secession law.
Yeah.
What do you think of his efforts to invite President Putin to come over and visit the United States? He did order bombing of the government forces in Syria to keep a distance from the Russian Federation. However, he also issued the invitation on a phone call asking President Putin to come over. Do you think this is a subtle triangle relationship between Russia, PRC, and the United States? During the Cold War, China was used as a bargaining chip.
Yeah.
Do you think this time around it's the Russians that will play the role? Very quickly, because we...
No, I don't think Russia can play such a role at this moment because Russia is not as important as China during the Cold War time. This is my first point.
But it's indeed a member of the P5.
And if we look at the relations between Russia and the United States, we can say it's a two-layered relationship. First is person-to-person, President Trump and Putin would like to have such a summit, but the domestic politics, especially the politicians in the Congress and also in Duma in Moscow, they would like to maintain such a tension between the two sides.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. And that's the end of this edition of Dialogue on presidency of Donald Trump. Whether it's a blessing or a curse for the world, we have to wait to see. Until next time, goodbye.